have many reasons for being God's friend. He helps us with everyday problems and gives us a hope for the future. But how can we become friends with God? We must get to know Him. To know Him, we must cultivate the mind of Christ. One good way to gain that mind of Christ and learn about Jehovah God is through His Son, Jesus. Tonight we will focus on how knowing Jesus will help us to know Jehovah God. We will cover two questions. First, why is Jesus qualified to help us to get to know Jehovah? And secondly, how can we use His example and His teachings to get to know Him, to help us to develop the mind of Christ and to get to know God? So first of all, that first point. Why is Jesus qualified to help us to know Jehovah? Let's first read our theme scripture, Matthew 11:27. So let's turn there, Matthew chapter 11, verse 27. And it says there in verse 27, "All things have been delivered to me by my Father, and no one fully knows the Son but the Father. Neither does anyone fully know the Father but the Son, and anyone to whom the Son is willing to reveal Him." So, this really shows how well Jehovah and Jesus know each other. No one knows Jehovah as well as Jesus does, and vice versa. No one knows Jesus as well as Jehovah does. But then that brings up the question, how and why do they know each other so well? That is answered in Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. This is Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. And it says there, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation." So it brings out there that Jesus was the firstborn of all creation. This means He had billions, if not trillions of years to get to know Jehovah God. Also, being God's personal companion, He not only observed God's qualities and His ways of doing things, but He absorbed them all as well. The scripture also stated that Jesus was the image of the invisible God. Now we've all seen pictures before, maybe of the Grand Canyon, for example. In those pictures, you can really see how huge that canyon is, how deep, what a void there is right there. How amazing. Jesus is like a picture of God. Through Him, we can see all of God's attributes and qualities. Through Him, we can really get to know Jehovah God. Now let's go on to the second point about how Jesus helps us to gain the mind of Christ and to get to know God. Knowing how someone stands on a matter helps you to know them personally, right? Well, Jesus showed us how Jehovah feels on matters. One time He did this was in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 and 44. Matthew 5, 43 and 44. And it says there, "You heard that it was said, 'You must love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' However, I say to you, continue to love your enemies and to pray for those persecuting you." So here, Jesus showed everyone that God did not agree with the common idea that you should hate your enemies. Instead, we should be peaceful and show love for them. And finally, Jesus also showed us God's qualities. One example of this is when He threw the greedy merchants out of the temple. This really showed Jehovah God's justice. So in conclusion, we all want to know Jehovah so that we can draw closer to Him. God's Son Jesus perfectly relates Jehovah to us through His example and teaching. So it is great, it is wonderful that we can look to Jesus to develop the mind of Christ and in turn learn much more about Jehovah.